Good morning to all of you in Dhaka. This is SK Ghosh. I would like to welcome you to the Training and Capacity Building Initiative of the S9 component of the Urban Resilience Project Rajuk part, which is on building code implementation and enforcement. As part of the initiative, we started our training program on March the 23rd. We did 3 weeks of two seminars each until the month of Ramadan started. Then we took a week's break. We are starting again. All the training so far has been general or structural. Today we are starting on the non-structural part. The seminar today will go from 10 to 12:15. I think the speaker may want a break or two in between. He will talk to you about that. Between 12:15 and 12:30, there will be a question and answer session. And if you have attended any of these seminars before, you know by now that to get continuing professional CPD hours, you will have to access and write and successfully pass a quiz within 24 hours after the seminar ends. So those details have been provided to you with instructions as to how to access the seminar, so I don't need to explain any of that. It is my pleasure now to introduce today's speaker. That's architect Ziaul Islam. Uh, Architect Zia has a bachelor's of architecture and a master of architecture degree from BWet. He is associate professor of architecture at the University of Asia Pacific. He is active as an architect. He is also professionally quite active in continuing education activities. He was involved in the update of what has now become the 2020 edition of BNBC. His topic today, as you see on the slide, is occupancy classification and types of construction classification. This is part 3 of BNBC. He will cover parts of chapters 1, 2, and 3 of part 3 today. Tomorrow, he will come back to talk about occupancy-based requirements, building height, and area limitations. That will also be part 3 of BNBC, parts of chapters 2 and 3. So with that, I would like to present to you Architect Zia, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Dr. S.K. Ghosh. I am Ziaul Islam. As you already know, that I am an associate professor in Department of Architecture, University of Asia Pacific. So our topic here is occupancy classification and types of construction classification as recommended in BNBC 2020. Today is 20th April 2021, and this training is part of the URP S09 training. Its module number is NS1. I thank International Court Council, Rajuk, SDE Limited, and the World Bank for arranging this webinar. So let's look forward. So today's presentation is subdivided into 3 segments of different timing. Segment 1 will be a bit shorter, so the early introductory segment it will describe a general outline of occupancy classification and types of construction from BNBC Part 3, Chapter 1. Then we will go for a recess for 5 minutes and we'll come back then with segment 2, which will be a bit longer, 60 minutes approximately. And it will discuss about occupancy classification, a bit detailed discussion. Then again, we'll take a 5-minute recess, and that will be the beginning of segment 3, approximately a 30-minute session, which will cover types of construction classification, a bit detailed discussion. So after that, in the last 15 minutes, we'll have a question and answer session. As you already know that you can write your question and answer at any moment. You can see a button at the right bottom where there is a question answer tab. You can click on it and put your question. So we will go through the question answer session at the last end of this presentation. So what we will cover here in this presentation today is part of chapter 1, 2, and 3 of BNBC 2020 part 3. Actually, it's part 3's 3 chapters partially covered. So let us get to the topic. We are starting segment 1 here, which is about a general outline on number 1 is occupancy classification, and number 2, types of construction classification. So let us get an idea about occupancy classification. Occupancy classification of buildings is based on occupancy or nature of use. How the occupants use the building, that is the basis of the occupancy classification categorization. It deals with the general and specific requirements of each of the occupancy groups, and more detailed information. Actually, it has a few chapters on it, but the initial brief description of the occupancy groups will be found in BNBC Part 3, Chapter 1. Especially, it starts with section 1.4, where occupancy and construction classification of buildings is a separate section. And there is a table 3.1.1, which describes it clearly. So, what is types of construction classification? Actually, the fire resistance ratings of various types of construction for structural and non-structural members are the basis for types of construction classification. So there are 2 classifications. One is occupancy based and one is types of construction based. So types of construction is determined by fire resistance rating of the structural and non-structural members. The detail of fire resistance, the detail of construction classification will be found in the same chapter, in the same section. However, there is a different table for that, table 3.1.2. We'll go through these tables so that we can have an idea about what these occupancies and construction classifications are. So we start with table 3.1.1. It is the summary of occupancy classification. As you can see, this is a table divided into 4 columns. The first column is about occupancy type, then subdivision, then nature of use of occupancy, and finally there is fire index with an asterisk, of course. So we'll discuss about the asterisk later on at the end of this chart or table. So as you can see in the occupancy type, each occupancy has been assigned with an alphabet. Here the residential occupancy is assigned with A. educational facilities with B and so on. We'll go along the table and we'll see that it continues up to M. So there are different letters assigned for different occupancy type, and there is a subdivision where the letter with a number has been uh, used to represent each subtype or subdivision. So here in the residential category, A1 is for single family dwelling, A2 is for two family dwelling, A3 is for flats or apartment, A4 for mess, boarding house, dormitories and hostels, A5 is for hotels and lodging houses. In the educational facilities, there are three subdivisions or subcategories, B1, B2 and B3. B1 for educational facilities up to higher secondary levels. B2 is facilities for training and above higher secondary education. B3 is preschool facilities. As you can see, the fire index is a number. Here the fire index is 1 for both the categories, both occupancy types. So the table continues. The C is basically for institution of care, institution for care. It has 5 subcategories or subdivisions. C1 is for institution for care of children. C2 is custodial institution for physically capable adults. C3 is custodial institution for the incapable adults. C4 is penal and mental institutions for children. C5 is penal and mental institution for adults. They all have a fire index of 1. But D, E, and F have a different fire index. As you can see, this is 2. So D is for healthcare facilities. There are 2 types. One is D1, normal medical facilities. The other is D2, emergency medical facilities. E is for business. E1 is for office. E2, research and testing laboratories. E3, essential services. F is for mercantile. F1 is small shops and markets. F2, large shops and market. And F3 is for refueling station. Now, G is for industrial building. There are 2 categories, subcategories. G1 is low hazard industries. G2 is moderate hazard industries. You can notice that the fire index has been increased in this segment. G1 and G2 and H1 and H2, the number is 3. In the H category, storage buildings, H1 and H2. H1 is low fire risk storage. H2 is moderate fire risk storage. I is assembly. I1 is for large assembly with fixed seats. I2 is small assembly with fixed seats. I3 large assembly without fixed seats. I4 is small assembly without fixed seats. And I5 is for sports facilities. They are of fire index 1. So then comes the hazardous building, J category. So J1 is for explosion hazard building, J2 chemical hazard building, J3 biological hazard building, J4 radiation hazard building. They have the highest fire index number, that is 4. So we are almost at the end of this occupancy classification table. K is for garage, K1 is parking garage, K2 is for private garage, K3 is for repair garage. As you can see, the fire index rating varies between different garages. It's a bit unconventional for a same occupancy type, but we'll get onto that later. L is for utility, M is miscellaneous, M1 is for structure, special structures, M2 is for fences, tanks and towers. So here we can get an explanation of this fire index. The fire index is an absolute number. Occupancy group having same fire index may be permitted as mixed occupancy, and different fire index shall be separated or detached as per provision of this code. So we are getting three new terminologies because so far we were clear that there are one particular alphabet assigned to each occupancy, and it has subcategories. So that is clearly stated out that this occupancy is for residential, or this is for educational, for healthcare or something. But here we can find three new terms. One is called mixed occupancy, the other is separated occupancy, and the other is detached occupancy. So let's have a look to those things, what is meant by mixed, separated, and detached occupancy. So mixed occupancy, here at least we can see that there are multiple mixed occupancies, but the first one is about non-separated use. So there is a footnote of occupancy classification that the occupancies can be mixed and with certain guidelines, of course. So what are the guidelines? Here is one. It says that the following occupancies shall not be required to designate as separate occupancy classification from uses to which they are accessory to any occupancy group other than occupancy group J. As we can see from the earlier chart that J is a hazardous occupancy, so J will be treated differently from the other occupancies, as you can see through the progression of this presentation. But for all other occupancies, the following 5 categories will not be required to designate as separate occupancy. They can be non-separated occupancies or non-separated use for the primary occupancy. So what are they? A is assembly rooms having a floor area not more than 75 square meter. B is the administrative and clerical offices and similar offices not exceeding 25% of the floor area of the major occupancy and not related to hazardous building as defined in occupancy J. C is administrative offices, gift shops, and other similar uses of occupancy A, provided the uses do not exceed 10% of the floor area of the major occupancy. And D is kitchen associated with dining area. E is carports having at least 2 sides entirely open associated with occupancy A. So these are mixed occupancies, non-separated use, of course. So they can be considered as part of the main occupancy, and we don't need to take any special measure to accommodate them. So here comes the separated occupancy. And as you can see, that separated occupancy also involves some construction measures. It's not only separated, it is also the construction that is also very important here. So separated occupancies and construction. It says that when 2 or more occupancies are accommodated in a building, each such occupancy shall be separated according to the provisions specified in section 2.3, chapter 2, part 3, and table 3.2.1. So we'll go into details of these tables and chapters and sections later on. So we can have an idea from this statement that there are options for mixing 2 or more occupancies in the same building, but it has a condition that there will be some separation requirements, and that is mentioned in a particular section and table of this part of BNBC. When 2 or more types of constructions used within a building, the entire building shall be subject to the most restrictive construction type and shall comply with FAR restrictions as per provision of this code. So it is about construction, not about occupancies. The second para is about type of constructions. So if we mix two types of or multiple types of constructions together, the most restrictive construction types shall be the shall dictate and dominate, and we have to comply with that, and the fire corresponding to those type of construction will be allotted to that particular development. So this is the second part, but the third para says that, however, if the occupancies within the different type of constructions are completely separated by construction that meet the fire resistance rating requirement of fire separation list in table 3.2.1 of chapter 1 part 3, then each occupancy so separated may for the purpose of the code be considered as separate building sections. So in a case when the occupancies are different and the constructions of for each occupancy is different, construction type is different. So if they are separated according to table 3.2.1, they can be considered as separate building section. So that is one kind of mixed occupancy that can be done in the same building. So separate, they can be considered as also the separate buildings if necessary. So restriction for mixed construction. In buildings of mixed construction, no structural element shall be supported by construction having a lower fire resistance rating than the required for the element being supported. So it's quite clear that no lower fire rated construction will support a higher fire rated construction. So let's look at this table 3.2.1, which is referred in the above slide. What is it about? So it is about barrier walls and floors and ceiling assemblies and their fire resistance rating requirement because they will separate two occupancies or two type of constructions from each other. So they are known as barrier walls or barrier floor and ceiling assemblies. And the fire resistance rating requirement is according to this chart, will be according to this chart. So this chart has as you can see that there are rows in the top side and columns in the left side, one column, having the same occupancy numbers, A1, A2, A3 up to M1 and M2. Here is also A1, A2, A3 up to M1 and M2. And in between them, there are three options. One is a number, the other is NA or not applicable, and the other is NP or not permitted. So when you get an NP in a situation which corresponds to the in the chart with other occupancies, you can understand that this particular type of construction is not permitted. But when you get a number somewhere that it is 3, say for example for E3 and B2, so it is permitted, but you will have a 3-hour separation for barrier walls and floors and ceiling assemblies. So this is the chart that allow us to make mixed occupancies with separation. So this is a separated occupancies chart. So here is detached occupancy, the last type of occupancy mixture, where a building separated by distance in the same plot to accommodate different type of occupancies shall be determined as detached occupancy. So here we are separating by distance. We are not separating by material or fire resistance requirement of material or construction materials. We are just separating different building blocks through distance, and that will ensure the fire safety. But it can be done within the same plot, as it happens in many complexes or campuses. So how will it be done? Actually, the separation distance is determined on the basis of two criterias. One is on the basis of difference of occupancies, and the other is on the basis of difference in height. As you know, for tall buildings, we have a separate uh, mm, separation rule and or setback rules. Um, but for occupancies, we also have separate setback and separation rules. So if it happens that two buildings side by side within a same plot are of different occupancies, so we can make two buildings. We can imagine an imaginary line in between, and from that we can see the fire separation distance. As in occupancy 1, it is D1 for occupancy 1, and for occupancy 2 it is a different fire separation distance, it is D2. So the overall separation distance between these two occupancies are D1 and D2, D1 plus D2, a combined distance. So this is how the separation distance will be measured for detached occupancies. And for buildings of different height, uh, the separation distance will also be different, and it will be determined by the height of the building then. Here, I think one point should be mentioned. There are two terminologies. One is separation distance and the other is one is setback. So they may be same or they may be different. The setback requirement may be different. The separation distance may be different sometimes, but most of the times they are same. However, if that happens, that the setback and the separation distance are not same, then the separation distance will govern. So that is what required for a detached occupancy. So now let us go to the classification of buildings based on types of construction. Um, as you can see that there are construction group, construction type, and the description. Two construction groups are there. One is non-combustible, group 1. The other is combustible, group 2. The names are self-explanatory. So we can understand that group 1 contains construction with materials which are non-combustible, and group 2 contains construction with materials which are combustible. So group 1 is subdivided in 5 construction type. Type 1A is 4-hour protected, 1B is 3-hour protected, 1C 2-hour, 1D 1 hour, and 1E is unprotected, but it is also made of non-combustible construction. In group 2, type 2A is heavy timber construction, 2B is protected wood joist construction, 2C is unprotected wood joist construction, 2D is protected wooden frame construction, 2E is unprotected wood frame construction. So one of the applicabilities, there will be much more, but one of the main applicabilities of these two types of classification is while issuing a development permit by the authority, say in our case maybe Rajuk or CDA or KDA or RDA, they shall clearly mention both the permitted occupancy and the construction type, not the permitted occupancy only or the construction type only. A development permit must contain both the classifications in accordance to table 3.11 and 3.12. So what happens to any building which is already in use, and uh, sometimes it happens that we want to change the use. So the rule says that there is we need permission to do that, because without prior permission from the authorities, no change shall be made in the number one type of occupancy or use of any building that would place it in a different occupancy group, and number two, in a different subdivision or same in the same occupancy group. So say for example, we have a house um, for residential category, say for A1 category, and we have decided to rent it out uh, for some commercial purpose. We can't do that. So we cannot change type of occupancy. At the same time, even we cannot convert it into a hostel or dormitory because it will send it into a different subdivision of the same occupancy group. That is also not allowed without the prior permission of the authority. We are almost at the end of this session. Just a quick go through of certain terminologies, because these terminologies will be coming again and again in our presentation, and we need to have a clear idea about these terminologies to understand this occupancy-based classification and the construction-based classification. So there will be one is barrier. A barrier is a wall or a partition or a floor slab or a ceiling within a building which confines and protects flow of smoke and fire from the exposed side of the barrier. The fire rating of barriers shall be complied with the provisions of this code. Then comes the control area. This is also related to the barrier. Control area is a space or a room within a building enclosed by barriers with the fire rated walls, floor and ceiling, where the quantity of hazardous material shall not exceed the maximum allowable quantity per control area for storing, displaying, handling, dispensing, and using as per provisions of this code. Then comes fire separation distance, a minimum distance which is to be maintained between potential sources and or between structures for fire safety. In case of difference between building setback and the required minimum fire separation distance measurement, the higher value shall be implied. So I was wrong in actually mentioning that the fire separation distance will be determinant. Actually, it says that the higher value shall be implied, either setback or the fire separation distance, which one is higher. Okay, so there is a rejoinder here first. Mixed occupancy. Mixed occupancy is when two or more occupancies are amalgamated in a building, shall be termed as mixed occupancy. Non-separated space condition. Walls and partitions between compartments, rooms, spaces and areas within a building or part of a building which are not separated by an approved fire rated barrier, walls or partitions shall be designated as non-separated use space condition or effective undivided single space. Separated occupancy. A building or a portion thereof separated by barriers with wall or ceiling slab that into two or more parts to accommodate different types of occupancies in different parts. Separated space condition. Rooms, spaces or areas within a building when separated by approved barrier walls. separation wall. This is a peripheral wall of a building or a building which shall be divided into two or more, or a common wall between two buildings to control spreading of fire as per provision of this code. Structural frame. All members or elements such as columns, girders, beams, trusses, spandrels, which forms a frame and have direct connections with bearing and transferring as an integral and essential element for the stability of a building or structure as a whole. Unprotected. The element that shall have no prerequisites of fire protection rating. Combustible material. Any material which burns and enhances the magnitude of fire. Party wall. A fire-resistant rated wall where openings are protected, which is constructed from the ground level and continued up to at least 1 meter above the roof of a building to restrict the spread of a fire. So these are the relevant terminologies, and as you can see that the whole thing is focused on resisting the risk of fire and ensuring the safety of life and the property. So maybe there are some repetition, but these are the important terminologies that we need to know. So tables and figures which are relevant to this presentation, this particular presentation today. We already have covered at least 3 tables. The first 3, one is about occupancy classification, the other one is about classification of buildings and type of constructions. The third one is about the fire resistance rating requirement for barrier walls and floor and ceiling assemblies. But there are other relevant tables that will be needed and we will discuss it on later, but these are the tables we need to consult. Table 3.2.2 is about fire resisting rating of the exterior wall. Table 3.2.3 is about the fire resistance rating of the opening protection assembly. Table 3.2.4 is about the permitted type of construction and fire zones of various occupancy group. Then there are 2 tables which deals with hazardous materials exempted amount. And finally, there is a table 3.2.6. It is an A to Z list of occupancy classification. So this is the end of the first segment. Thank you for your patience, and we will have a recess for 5 minutes. So thank you. So let's start with our second segment, the occupancy classification. In this segment, we have quite a number of changes than the previous building code had. The occupancy classification, there are a few new classifications added here, some new subcategories and some new occupancies been redistributed. So there are a few changes. So let's look at it. The main occupancies are, right now there are 13 occupancies, main occupancies, and they have individual subcategories, sub-occupancies. Residential, educational, institution for care, healthcare, we have gone through it already, so I won't just repeat it. One thing is stated here that every building or portion thereof and land use shall be classified according to the use of the character of its occupancy as a building of occupancy A to M as defined below. So while discussing them, we also need to know about certain more aspects which are stated in section 2.1.2, 2.1.3 and 2.1.4 of part 3 chapter 1 of BNBC. The first one says that utilities under occupancy L is incidental to operation in all other type of occupancy except occupancy J shall be considered as non-separated use of the main occupancy, but shall be taken special safety measure as per provision of this code. So L, although it is a separate occupancy, individual occupancy, but it will be mostly considered as non-separated use, except in the occupancy J. But there might be special safety measures to accommodate it as a non-separated use. So 2.1.3 says that we have a table called A to Z list, table 3.2.6. It says that any occupancy or use type not mentioned specifically in table 3.2.6 A to Z list or elsewhere in the code shall be classified by the Board of Appeals under the occupancy group to which its use most closely resembles, considering the life safety and fire hazard. So if there is any project that doesn't fall into any categories that we can find in these occupancies, we can refer it to this Board of Appeal, and they will assign a occupancy for that particular project, which will most closely resembles. But what will be the basis? The basis will be the considering the life safety and fire hazard. On the basis of that, they will decide the category of classification of that project. 2.1.4, each occupancy group shall be subdivided as detailed in the following sections. The detailed classification, including mixed occupancy provided in the 3.2.6, is non-exhaustive. So 3.2.6 doesn't cover all the occupancies. It might be, there might be other occupancies left out. So if there is any use or character of occupancy in a building which is not mentioned here, it shall be classified as per the provisions of the earlier section 2.1.3. Now let us go to the details of each occupancies. So the residential occupancy, we start with that. This occupancy shall include any building or portion thereof providing sleeping and living accommodations to related or unrelated group of peoples with or without independent bathrooms, cooking and dining facilities, except any building classified under occupancy C or D. This occupancy shall be subdivided as follows. So as we can see this para, the sentence structure is made in a manner where we first tell about the infrastructure that is to be that we are talking about. It is a building or portion of building. Then we are talking about the use of the building for sleeping or living. Then we are talking about the user group. What are they? Are they related or unrelated? Then we are also talking about the infrastructure facilities, and we are also talking about the exclusion, which will not be excluded in this category, and that is all. So this sentence structure will be repetitively carried through the code because it will be a bit repetitive, and I'm sorry if it sounds boring, but this is the structure of this part and this classification. So we will be seeing this sentence formation again and again, and probably this is good for us to understand it in these subcategories so that we can look for special details for each category. So we start with A1, single family dwelling. This shall include any building, row type or semi-detached or detached from neighboring buildings by distances required by the code and having independent access to the plot, which is used as private dwelling by members of a single family. A2, two-family dwelling. This shall include any building, row type or semi-detached or detached from neighboring buildings by distance required by the code and having shared or independent access for two families and having facilities for living, cooking and bathroom facilities independent of each other. A3, flat or apartment. This shall include any building or portion thereof which is provided for more than two families having facilities for living, cooking and bathroom facilities independent of each other. Then comes A4, mess, boarding house and dormitories and hostels. This shall include any building or portion thereof in which sleeping, living accommodations and bathrooms are provided for groups of related or unrelated persons, with or without common dining facilities and with common cooking under single management control or with individual or group cooking facilities. A5, hotels and lodging houses. This shall include any building, a portion thereof or group of buildings under single management in which sleeping, living accommodation and bathroom facilities are provided with or without dining facilities, but without cooking facilities for adult individuals is provided for hire on transient or permanent basis. So that concludes the A group, that residential group. We start with the educational facilities, occupancy B. This occupancy type shall include any building or portion thereof in which education, training and care are provided to children or adults. This occupancy shall be subdivided as follows. B1, educational facilities up to higher secondary level. This shall include any building or portion thereof used for purpose involving assembly for instructions, education and recreation for more than 6 persons on regular basis to fulfill the requirement of an academic curriculum approved by the government up to higher secondary level and which is not covered by occupancy I. Then B2, facilities for training and for above secondary level. This shall include any building or portion thereof used for purpose involving assembly for instruction, education, training and recreation for more than 6 persons and which is not covered by the occupancy I and B1. B3 is for preschool facilities. This shall include any building or portion thereof used for purpose involving care, recreation and education for children more than 6 in number who have not yet reached the age to attend the school. Then comes the institution for care, occupancy C. Buildings classified under this occupancy shall include those used for purpose of institutional care of the occupants, such as detention for correctional or penal purposes, medical or nursing care for persons suffering from illness or infirmity due to mental condition, or accommodation of children or minor where the personal liberty of the inmate is restricted. These buildings shall ordinarily provide accommodation for sleeping, dining, and other provisions approved by the authority for the occupants. This occupancy shall be subdivided as follows. So institution for care of children, C1. This shall include any building or portion thereof or group of buildings under single management used as an institution for the full-time care of children or minor, each providing accommodation for sleeping, dining, and other provisions approved by the authority for more than 6 children. C2 is custodial institution for physically capable adults. This shall include any building or portion thereof or group of buildings under single management used for purpose of full-time care and custody of adult or mentally disabled persons, but physically capable of responding to emergency. Now, I would like to add few words to this situation, because we can see that all the classifications or occupancies have their descriptions, but the underlying tone is about whether the occupants can respond to emergency, especially in institutional category C1, C2, C3, C4. You can see that there are people who are infirm, who cannot move without assistance. There are children who cannot be, who are on custody of some other members, adult members of the society. So in case of an emergency, they probably don't know how to respond to the emergency. So these are all custodial institutions or care institutions where the occupancy is decided in a manner that where the people will be independently able to respond to an emergency or not. So let's go to the third segment of it, C3, custodial institution for incapable adults. This shall include any building or portion thereof or group of buildings under single management used for purpose of full-time care and custody of persons physically or mentally incapable of responding to emergency. C4 is penal and mental institution for children. So this shall include any building or portion thereof or group of buildings under single management used for housing children under restraint or who are detained for penal and corrective purposes, in which personal liberty of the inmate is restricted. C5 is penal and mental institution for adults. So this shall include any buildings or portion thereof or group of buildings under single management used for housing persons under restraint or who are detained for penal and corrective purposes, in which personal liberty of the inmate is restricted. Now comes occupancy D, healthcare facilities. Buildings under this occupancy group shall include those used for purposes of providing medical care, diagnostic facilities, and treatment to persons suffering from physical discomfort, in which sleeping accommodation may or may not be provided. This occupancy shall be subdivided into as follows. D1 is normal medical facilities. This shall include buildings or portion thereof or group of buildings under single management in which essential medical facilities having surgery, emergency and casualty treatment facilities, general or specialized medical and other treatment are provided to persons suffering from physical discomfort. So it is about treating the persons with physical discomfort. These are all general medical facilities. The D2 category, emergency medical facilities, it describes that this shall include any building or portion thereof used for purposes of providing essential medical services, having surgery, emergency, casualty treatment facilities, general or specialized medical or other treatment is provided to persons suffering from physical discomfort. Up to this point, it resembles like D1. but there are some exceptions that made it a different subcategory. This type shall be equipped and designated to handle post-disaster emergency. By construction, it is required to remain operational during and after disaster, built as a part of disaster preparedness program. So D2 is a special facility which needs to be operational in post-disaster situation, or it will be part of disaster preparedness program. So occupancy E is for business. This shall include any building or portion thereof which is used for business transaction other than mercantile. This occupancy shall be subdivided as follows. Office E1. This shall include any building or part thereof which is used for paperwork, documentation, only display of samples of products but not for direct sale, maintaining accounts and records for administrative or consulting services, banking, or activities for business purposes, and professional training. So that is category E1. Category E2 is about research and testing laboratories. This shall include any building or portion thereof which is used as research establishment and or test laboratories involving hazardous materials within the limit of exempted quantity permitted in this code. The third one is E3, essential services. This shall include any building or portion thereof used for purposes of providing emergency services and utilities which are required to remain operational during and after a disaster or other emergency situations. So these are essential services, a different category, newly introduced. It was not part of the earlier BNBC. So we'll go to the mercantile occupancy. It is F. This occupancy type shall include any building or portion thereof or group of buildings which is used for display and sale of merchandises. This occupancy shall be subdivided as follows. Small shops and markets, F1. This shall include any building or portion thereof which with an area divided or undivided not exceeding 300 square meter, used for purpose of displaying and sales of merchandise, either wholesale or retail, with or without incidental storage and service facilities. Large shops and markets, F2 category. This shall include any building or portion thereof with an area divided or undivided more than 300 square meter, used for purpose of display and sale of merchandise, either wholesale or retail, with or without incidental storage and service facilities. The third one is refueling station, F3. This shall include any building or portion thereof used for providing refueling and maintenance without repair services for automobiles, which is moderately hazardous in nature. So we are getting into difficult occupancies, not in a sense that it is something different from other occupancies, but in a sense that which requires much more protection and care in terms of fire safety and other safeties. So here we start with occupancy G, industrial building. Buildings under this occupancy shall be subdivided on the basis of hazard potential of the contents and the process of the industry. So it is the hazard potential of the contents of an industry or the process of an industry that that determines this category or subcategory. The hazard shall generally mean the relative danger of the start of fire and the rapidity of its spread, the danger of smoke and gases generated from generated that pose a potential threat to the safety of the occupants of the building. Unless areas with different degree of hazard are effectively segregated and separated in accordance with the provisions of this code, the most hazardous area in a building shall govern its classification. So there is an indication how it can be made safe. We need to separate and segregate hazardous areas, and in that way we can make the building safe. Otherwise, the most hazardous area of the building shall govern its classification. This occupancy shall also include facilities for public utility services at the producer or distributor's end and deals with generation and distribution of utility facilities. Any such building or portion thereof which is not using hazardous material quantified and categorized in occupancy group J shall be subdivided as follows. Low hazard industry G1. This shall include any industrial building in which contents are of such low combustibility and the process conducted therein are of such low hazardous nature that danger of self-ignition and self-propagation of fire is non-existent. The only danger being an onset of fire from external sources with the resulting danger to life and property. So it is a relatively safer low hazard industry. G2 is about moderate hazard industry. This shall include any industrial building in which contents are moderately combustible and the industrial process conducted therein are liable to give rise to a fire which will spread this moderate rapidity, giving off considerable smoke. So it has moderate hazard. Then comes the occupancy group H, storage buildings. Buildings under this occupancy group shall include any building or portion thereof used primarily for storage or sheltering of goods, wares, merchandises, vehicles or animals. Any such building or portion thereof which is not used for storing hazardous material quantified and categorized in occupancy group J shall be subdivided as follows. So occupancy group H comes into two categories. One is low fire risk storage category H1. The other is moderate fire risk storage category H2. H1 is the category where this shall include any building or portion thereof which is used for storage of materials or other contents which do not constitute the danger of self-ignition. And in the event of fire, the rate of burning shall be less than moderate rapidity. So we will have more details in the fire segment, fire chapter part 4, about what is low fire rapidity or moderate fire rapidity or high fire rapidity. That will be discussed on the later presentations. But for the time being, the low fire risk storage occupancy says that it has contents or storages of materials that has less moderate rapidity of fire. So moderate fire risk, less than moderate rapidity of fire. So it is not moderate, it is less than moderate rapidity. So for moderate fire risk storage, it is the building of, it is describing that they shall include any building or portion thereof which is used for storage or materials which do not constitute the danger of self-ignition, but which in the event of fire will burn with moderate rapidity. Items which shall be deemed to render a building hazardous are specified in section 2.14.3 along with exempted amount for each item. So we have new references about section 2.14.3 and the new terminology that an exempted item is there. So there are two tables containing a list of exempted items, table 3.2.5a and 3.2.5b, which deals with exempted amount of hazardous material. The basic idea of this table is about uh, uh, stating a limit of storage. As you can see in the fourth column, there is a storage limit. The storage can be of two types. It can be a closed system storage or it can be an open system storage. So closed system storage and open system storage are two systems. If it is remain open, the storage safety margin is compromised, and so the storage quantity reduced considerably. But if you can compartmentalize it and use a closed system, you can increase the storage limit. So that is the basic idea of this chart or table. There are different types of materials which are flammable, combustible, combination of flammable gases, liquid, flammable, combustible fibers, and there are many others. So for each, there is a class or state describing it into its class. Actually, it is more about its fire spread capacity, and that determines the storage limit. So if we can use control area for the storage of these elements according to this chart, we can create a safer environment for hazardous materials. So this is the continuation of the same chart. There are oxidizing gases, pyrophoric material, detonable, there are explosive materials. So the chart covers all sort of hazardous materials. There are some other types of hazardous materials that can pose threat to your health hazard. So here, the same thing is here. They can be corrosive, highly toxic, or toxic. So in a single storage situation, a closed system can accommodate up to this quantity safely. The open system can be different here. So that determines the basic guidelines of occupancy H, the hazardous occupancy. So we will go for assembly occupancy I. Building under this occupancy group shall include any building or portion thereof in which groups of people congregate or assemble for recreation, amusement, social, religious, political, cultural, travel, and similar purposes. This occupancy shall be subdivided as follows. Large assembly with fixed seats, I1. This occupancy shall include a building or a portion thereof for assembly in a space provided with fixed seats for 1,000 or more persons. Assembly buildings under this subdivision may be for theatrical, operatic performance, or cinema projection, having or not a raised stage, proscenium curtain, scenery loft, or projection screen, lighting equipment, projection booth, and necessary theatrical and mechanical equipment. Small assembly with fixed seats, I2. This occupancy type shall include any building or portion thereof primarily meant for use as described for building under occupancy 2, but with fixed seats for less than 1,000 persons in a space. These assembly buildings may or may not be provided with a legitimate technical stage, theatrical stage, or related accessories or equipment. So the I3, large assembly without fixed seats, this occupancy type shall include any building or portion thereof for assembly in a space in which there are no fixed seats, which may or may not be provided with a legitimate stage or theatrical accessories, and which has accommodation for 300 or more persons. I4, small assembly without fixed seats. This occupancy shall include any building or portion thereof primarily intended for use as described in occupancy I3, but with accommodation for less than 300 persons in a space. I5, sports facilities. This occupancy type shall include any building or portion thereof meant for assembly of spectators for recreational and amusement purpose, mainly related to sports. So we start the new category, occupancy J, hazardous building. Any building or portion thereof used as storage, industrial, research, and other facilities dealing with hazardous material in excess of exempted quantity defined in table 3.2.5 or any microbiological facilities shall be categorized in this occupancy group. So the same industry or storage building or research and other facilities can be categorized in a different category if they uh, uh, if they deal with the hazardous material within the exempted quantity uh, in a different category. But if they have excess of exempted quantity with them, then they will be considered as hazardous buildings. Definition of hazard and the amount of such material which shall be deemed to render building hazardous are set forth in section 214.3. This occupancy shall subdivide as follows. Explosion hazard building, J1. This shall include any building or portion thereof which is used for storage, handling, processing, or manufacturing of explosive materials and products that have explosion hazard. Chemical hazard building, J2. This shall include any building or portion thereof which is used for storage, handling, processing, or manufacture of materials and products that are highly corrosive, toxic, poisonous, and physically harmful, including corrosive and toxic alkalis, acid, and other liquids or chemicals producing flame, fumes, radiation, and explosive, poisonous, irritant, or corrosive gases. Biological hazard building, J3. This shall include any building or portion thereof which is used for storage, handling, processing, and manufacturing of materials and products that use biological processes and in which the risk of harmful biological threat to the occupants exist. J4, radiation hazard building. This shall include any building or portion thereof which is used for storage, handling, processing, or manufacture of materials and products that use nuclear and radioactive processes and in which the risk of radioactive contamination exists. Occupancy K, garage. These occupancy types shall include any building or portion thereof used one or more vehicles having containers of flammable liquid or compressed gas or carrying power or combination of any of these as a supply source of self-propelling are kept for use, sale, rental purpose, storage, repair, exhibition, and all those floors of a building or portion thereof in which such vehicles are not separated by suitable cutoffs to prevent fire spreading. Parking garage K1. This occupancy type shall include any building or portion thereof used solely for parking motor vehicles for a limited period of time. Private garage K2. This occupancy type shall include any building or portion thereof used as store for owners or tenants' motor vehicles for private use for unlimited period of time. Repair garage and showrooms. This occupancy type shall include any building or portion thereof wherein repair of electrical or mechanical system or denting or painting works of body is performed on any type of vehicles and include associated floor spaces used as office, showrooms, incidental store, and car parking. Occupancy L utility. This occupancy type shall include any building or portion thereof used to install any type of equipment to provide support services to any building or portion thereof or group of buildings of all occupancy groups and with special provisions for occupancy group J. This shall also include all public and private utility facilities of the consumer's end that are located within the consumer's site, and all installations are required special care to ensure life and property safety as per provisions of this code. Occupancy definition for miscellaneous. This is the last category we have. Buildings under this occupancy shall include special buildings not covered in other occupancy groups. These occupancies shall be as follows. Special structure M1. Any building or structure which is neither listed in the A to Z list nor covered in any occupancy group provided in this code but unique in character may be categorized in this group by the Board of Appeals. Each and every individual M1 structure shall be complied with NFPA or equivalent standard for the life and fire safety. M2, fences, tanks and towers. This shall include fences and boundary walls over 1.5 meter high, standalone structures for gravity water tank, and towers for telecommunication, power distribution, air traffic control terminal, or observation towers. So this is the main description of the occupancy classification for each occupancies, and at the end of this session we will visit a list of occupancy classification. It is table 3.2.6 located at chapter 2 of part 3. At the end of this chapter we can get table 3.2.6. Let's have a look to that table. So here is table 3.2.6 A to Z list. As you can, if you can go through it, you can see that there are alphabetical orders of different uses. At the right end is the occupancy class or subclass, and there is a brief description in between. So it is a large content where many occupancies are covered. Our day-to-day uses mostly are covered here, but there might be some occupancies which are left out. So they have clear indication in the main occupancy group, and if not, then it must be referred to Board of Appeals, and they can tell us about what occupancy they should be. So this is quite a long list containing many occupancy classifications, and their categories or subcategories. So um, so that is the end of this segment, and then we'll come back 5 minutes later again, taking a 5-minute recess. Thank you. Okay, we can start again. Thank you. Uh, so I hope you can hear me. Uh, let's start with segment 3. Okay. So segment 3 is about classification of building construction types based on fire restrictions. It is mostly covered in chapter 3 of part 3 in BNBC 2020, but it also is very largely covered in part 4 as well. So actually all the occupancies are covered, all the classifications are covered in both part 3 and part 4 very well. So today our scope limits limits our discussion to part 3 only. That's why we won't go to the details of part 4, but maybe there will be a later presentation by Professor Helali on part 4 that will clarify a few things better. So this is the classification of building on the basis of types of construction. We have already gone through it. So we know that there are combustible and non-combustible types, and each have 5 sub-construction type. So the code states that no building or portion thereof shall be designated a given construction type unless it fully conforms to the minimum requirement for that construction type. So this term fully conforms is very important. It cannot conform partially. So any construction type must be, any building must have the same construction type to conform it to the code all along. So when a type of construction is utilized which is superior than the type of construction required by this code, say for an example, if the code asks for a type 2A construction, and maybe there is a previous development which already has a type 2A construction, but the new construction is intended to be done in type 1A construction. It is like this case when a type of construction is utilized which is superior than the type of construction required by this code, there shall be no requirement to upgrade the rest of the construction to comply to that higher type of construction. And the designated construction type shall be that of a lesser classification unless all of the requirement of the higher classification are met. So although we are using a higher classification construction here partly, but it will be credited to the lower classification construction because of the presence of that segment in the construction. So, but it covers the requirement because the code requires maybe a type 2 construction. So that's fine with the authority, they can approve it. They can always approve the higher type of construction, but cannot accredit for that unless the whole structure is converted into a higher type construction. So the fire resistance ratings of various types of construction for structural and non-structural members are specified in table 3.3.1a and b. We'll go through these tables. For hazardous occupancies involving an exceptionally high degree of fire risk or an exceptionally high concentration of combustible or flammable content, the authority may increase the requirement of table 3.3.1a. Buildings having a height of more than 33 meters shall be constructed with non-combustible materials. The fire resistance ratings of various building components shall conform to ASTM standards. So these are basic introductory information on this construction classification. Now we are coming to the definitions. What is non-combustible construction? Building or portion thereof in non-combustible construction group 1 are those in which walls, exitways, shafts, structural members, floors and roofs are constructed of non-combustible material and assemblies having fire resistance ratings specified in table 3.3.1a. The non-combustible group consists of construction type 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D and 1E. So construction type 1A, this construction type includes buildings in which the bearing walls and other major structural elements are generally of 4-hour fire resistance rating. Accordingly, type 1B is for 3-hour fire resistance rating. Type 1C is for 2-hour fire resistance rating. Type 1D is for 1-hour fire resistance rating. And type 1E is no fire resistance rating. So type 1E is a type that includes building in which bearing walls and other major structural elements generally have no fire resistance rating. Or group 2, where combustible construction is there, buildings or portion thereof in combustible construction group 2 are those in which walls, exitways, shafts, structural members, floors and roofs are constructed wholly or partly of combustible materials, having fire resistance ratings specified in table 3.3.1b. The non-combustible group consists of construction type 2A, 2B, 2C, 2D and 2E. Construction type 2A. This construction type includes heavy timber construction in which fire resistance is attained by A, limiting the minimum size of wood structural members and the minimum thickness and composition of wood floors and roofs. So the size of wooden members used in the structure, in the floor and roof is of importance here, and there is a specified dimension for them to ensure the safety. B is avoiding concealed spaces under floors and roofs or by providing fire stopping protection for these spaces. So that is another measure for further safety, fire protection. C is using fastening, construction details and adhesive for structural members as required by this chapter and part 4. D is the minimum dimension for framing members shall be prescribed in this chapter and part 4, except that members are protected to provide a fire resistance rating of at least 1 hour need not comply with this requirement. So this is the construction type 2A. For 2B construction type, this construction type includes buildings and portion thereof in which exterior walls, firewalls, exitways, and shaft enclosures are of non-combustible materials, having the required fire resistance ratings. And the floors, roofs, and interior framing are wholly or partly of wood of smaller dimensions than required for type 2 construction, and are of other combustible or non-combustible materials having the required fire resistance rating. So construction type 2C, this construction type includes buildings and portion thereof in which exterior walls, firewalls, exitways, and shaft enclosures are of non-combustible material having the required fire resistance rating. B, the floors, roofs, and interior framing are wholly or partly of wood of smaller dimension than required for type 2A construction and are of other combustible or non-combustible materials having no required fire resistance rating. So as you can see from these three construction types that two features are more important. One is the how the walls are constructed and the floors and roofs are constructed, and they can be partially protected or not. So that determines the classification type. Construction type 2D. This construction type includes buildings and portion thereof in which exterior walls, bearing walls, floors, roofs, and interior framings are generally of wood or other combustible materials, having the required fire resistance ratings. So these are four construction types. The final one, type 2E, this type of construction of buildings, this type includes buildings and proportion thereof and portion thereof in which the exterior walls are generally of wood or other combustible materials having the required fire resistance ratings, and in which bearing walls, floors, roofs, and interior framings are of wood or other combustible materials, generally having no fire resistance ratings. So this is the last construction type, 2E. Now about construction separation. This separation also will include occupancy, not only construction. When two or more occupancies accommodated in a building, each such occupancy shall be separated according to the provisions specified in section 2.3, chapter 2, part 3, table 3.2.1. We have already gone through it, that step chart or table separated by hours. So the second para says that when two or more types of construction used within a building, the entire building shall be subject to most restrictive construction type and shall comply with fire restrictions as per provision of this code. However, if the occupancies within the different types of constructions are completely separated by construction that meets the fire resistance rating requirement of fire separation listed in table 3.2.1 of part 3 chapter 1, then each occupancy so separated may, for the purpose of this code, be considered as separated building section. We have already covered it in our first segment of discussion, but this is a reminder of the separation of constructions. So for separation of construction elements and fire rating, we have table 3.3.1a and table 3.3.1b. 1a is for non-combustible group, construction group 1. As you can see that there are, at the first column, there is fire separation distance of the exterior wall. Then comes the construction element of the exterior wall. And then for different types of construction, It is rating in hours and the status of exterior opening on the exterior wall. So this table 3.3.1a, we are not going into the detail of each of the components. It is for any given situation, we can at least see certain aspects like if we have better setback or separation distance, we can have an effect on fire rating or fire separation rating, and also on the exterior openings decision. So for lesser separation, we have higher fire rating and no permission for exterior opening, but for better setback and separations, we have opening criterias suited to this course as per provision of this course code, and relatively relaxed fire rating. So this is the first table describing in detail each component of our construction, the walls and the roofs and the floors and shafts and party walls or fire exits and their fire rating and their opening where necessary. And there are three situations which determines which part will be made with non-combustible material and which are not permitted and which has no limit. So the shade has a meaning here in this table. This part will be non-combustible. The white part may be combustible, made with combustible situations. So this is the first chart. The second chart, table 3.3.1b, is about fire rating of construction group 2. It is combustible materials. The same structure is followed here. The left one is about the fire separation distance, and then the construction element of the exterior wall, and later there are floors and roofs, specification for floors and roofs, and there are other segments of the structure like access corridor, fire separation wall and party wall, shafts, and recommendation for those things. So one important thing about these two charts, or two tables, is that there is a very long footnote for each of the chart, for both charts actually, at the end of the charts. The footnote contains detailed variations and exceptions for individual groups. If we can go through the charts, we can see that in a situation, say for this particular area, there is a symbol I above 1, which is clarified in these footnotes. So it says that materials which are not non-combustible as defined in this code may be used in non-bearing construction element as per provision of the code. So each superscript here has an explanation underneath, and so that we can go through these explanations and can get a idea of each of the um, detailed requirement of for each occupancy group. So that's the end of this segment. Thank you. And I think it's time for the question answer session. Okay, so I'm stopping my screen share. Okay. Uh, okay. Um, but how can I follow the questions here? Uh, in the screen share mode, I can't see the questions here. Yeah. Okay. Okay, I'm stopping here. Okay. Yeah, I can see the questions. So the first question asked by Fatima, uh, it was, what do you mean by fire index? I think it was explained in the first table where uh, it stated that occupancies with same fire index can be mixed, uh, and occupancies with different fire index may not be mixed or needed separate arrangements, separated use or separate arrangements for uh, coexistence. So actually fire index is a fire related requirement that says which occupancies can mix with other occupancy and which needs extra precaution or may not mix. So this is one, C1 and C3, same fire index. C1 and C3, yes, they are same fire index. Uh, what do you mean by separated and non-separated use? Well, uh, non-separated uses are those which can be um, which can accompany the main occupancy group without taking special provisions, special structural or fire provisions. But separated uses are situations where two occupancies or multiple occupancies are separated by requirements of fire resistance materials and constructions. So they have to be separated, separate type of constructions. They can be within a building or they can be separated by distance. Um, the next question is, um, what is the distance for separated occupancies? Well, it is defined in part 3. There are separation distances for each of the occupancies, but we haven't covered it here. It varies from occupancies to occupancies. Actually, it varies not only from occupancies, it also varies according to the building typologies. As you can see that there were options for row houses, semi-detached houses, detached houses. So there are situations where the separation distance is not there. Buildings are sharing their walls with the neighbors. So when that kind of situation appears, then the rules of party wall applies. Fire barriers comes in. So it varies from situation to situation. So there is no any fixed distance uh, uh, to separate occupancies. What value should we use to determine fire separation distance? Probably it is the same question asked before. So I think I have answered it. Please explain again party wall. Okay. So let's go back to my presentation. A party wall is a fire resistance rated wall where openings are protected, which is constructed from the ground level and continued up to at least 1 meter above the roof level of a building to restrict the spread of fire. So party wall is a wall at the property line actually uh, adjoining two buildings. Uh, it is a fire rated wall uh, and where openings are protected. So it is constructed from the ground level and it will at the top it will go 1 meter above the roof line to protect the spread of fire. So that is what a party wall is. Um, please provide us the material for this lecture. I think it will be provided. Okay, okay, yeah, okay. Okay. Um, how the fire index is classified, why it is necessary for the roof of a industrial single storage shed to be fire rated. Well, I think this is a question better asked in the part 4 chapter where they single-handedly deal with fire issues. Uh, the basic idea of fire index is in this part at least is about two things. One is about creating zones in the city. It is a kind of planning guideline that high risk um, building components cannot be located in anywhere in the city. So this fire index, the idea of fire index is introduced so that the zones can be separated. For hazardous buildings, we can locate a separate zone, and it can be they can all group together there. So that is one thing. The other thing is also that we can understand that this particular occupancy classification has a relatively higher risk of fire than the other one. So if we mix two occupancies, what precautions we should take So that is the basic idea of fire index. Um, so there is a question probably asked by engineer Mohammad Mustahid Azad. Maximum factory buildings fall in construction category type 1B, which requires slab thickness 6.2 inch for 3 hours fire rating, but structurally is overestimated even for a big panel. Is it not increasing project cost? 2.5 hours fire rating instead of 3 hours, not enough. Actually, the code has already decided on it. Uh, uh, we have the necessary safety requirement for each category. So that is abiding here, abiding, we must abide by. So will burn with moderate rapidity means. Okay, I think I can just clarify the idea, but the detail will come into the um, um, fire or part 4 lectures. The idea of fire spread is that if a fire generates at some point, how quickly it spreads outward or in the surrounding. So if there are materials that helps to spread rapidly, uh, very rapidly or moderately rapidly, or very slowly. The same fire can spread in a very fast manner and occupy the whole floor, or depending upon the material, it may be isolated and uh, may not spread. So the whole idea of this moderate rapidity uh, or less than moderate rapidity is about that fire spread reduction, fire spread control actually. So that is what is meant by moderate rapidity. Um, why there is a difference between occupancy of assembly with or without fixed seats? Well, uh, actually think about two situations. One is an auditorium or a cinema hall where we have fixed seats and say 500 persons accommodating in the same hall, and think of a say mosque uh, where we don't have any fixed seats. It is an open floor uh, with same amount of persons. In case of fire, which one will be safer or easier to evacuate from? So the whole classification is also about safety of people and therefore the criteria of fixed seats and without fixed seats actually comes in. The question here is refueling station could be in the group of hazardous building, occupancy is J. I think refueling station should be in group J1, explosive in nature, or J2, material composition. Being explosive in nature, why refueling station is categorized in F3? Please explain. Okay. Actually, refueling stations also need a permission from our Bishforok Adhidaptor, and they the code here categorize it as F3 depending upon the quantity of um, uh, exempted quantity of the material as guided by the uh, other authorities. It is not only um, 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 the code specifies the exempted quantity. If it is within this limit, it will be definitely in this category, and if it is not, uh, as per guideline of the code, if it complies with the quantity, it will be F3. If it's not, then it will go to the hazardous category, of course. You are right that it can also be categorized as hazardous building. If a building has a occupancy such that condition 1, 300 people congregate in one area on second floor and the upper floors are residential. Condition 2, 300 people congregate in one area on roof and the lower stories are residential. What should the rationale to select an occupancy category for the building under those two conditions? Actually, when 300 people congregate in a building, uh, it is um, I think it is an assembly, so it is already a mixed-use building. And if it is a mixed-use building and a residential, if it is a assembly category I building and category A residential building in combined in a same facility, so it will need fire separations and adequate separations for as per recommendation of this code. Uh, I don't know whether I have, if I am clear or not on this question, but uh, it seems that there are two types of occupancies you are trying to mix. One is residential, the other is assembly. So they will be considered as mixed occupancy with separation, of course, uh, or separate occupancies. Why bearing walls have more rating than non-bearing walls? Well, bearing walls are the main elements that transfer the loads of the building, of the structure, and it is needed for safety of the property and the occupants that the bearing wall lasts long in an emergency situation, in a fire situation. So bearing walls need to be rated more than non-bearing walls. Non-bearing walls can be partition walls with uh, other materials, but bearing walls need to be a well-rated material which resists fire for much longer time. Does any special consideration for fire rating designing steel structure? Well, I think your question will be answered in part 4 discussion. Better answered will be better answered there. We are not going through this detail here. Um, so from now on, it is necessary to mention that fire rating of buildings on drawings, element wise. Okay, it is up to the authority because they will indicate the development permit. They will ask for a particular type of construction and a particular occupancy for a particular project. It is up to their format what they will require or not, but it is on the professionals responsibility, and it was as always that we abide by the code and we we draw and specify and construct buildings according to the code. So if we want to make some construction on a site from a drawing board, probably we need to specify um, material specifications, probably where fire rating is also one of the elements um, in the drawing board. So I think it is somewhere it will be directly or indirectly included. What is the importance of occupancy category in seismic of structure? Well, uh, the construction classification is more related to the fire and seismic situation, definitely. But occupancy has a very indirect connection in a sense that uh, when a building is occupied by many occupants uh, in seismic situation, uh, what will be the emergency evacuation procedure and like other safety measures uh, will be considered in those occupancy categories. What is the guideline for steel structure, both low-rise and high-rise? Actually, we are not discussing material in detail in this presentation. Why building code separate A1 and A2? Is there any separate provision in BNBC? Well, this is a common typology, quite uh, quite commonly found in Bangladesh, where there are single family houses, there are two family houses, and there are multi-family houses. So for smaller construction in many rural or semi-urban areas, we have A2 typologies which were now subdivided into a new category. And probably with the provision of row type or semi-detached type construction, it will help to increase densities if necessary in the long run. So what steps should be taken, should be needed when the structure is defined as it not occupancy, the occupancy category as per BNBC. I'm not very clear about this question. What steps should be needed when the structure is defined as it not occupancy, the occupancy category as per BNBC? I'm not very sure about it, what it means. If fulfill the all code, project cost will be high. Therefore, what is way of cost minimize? The code, building code deals with the safety of life and property. So it is up to the authority, the owner of the project, the professionals, that they make a safe and habitable structure within a reasonable cost, of course. I think we have a different occupancy, different construction group inclusion in this part where combustible materials are also included, where relatively lower cost buildings can be done. But then again, cost cannot be the determinant of our safety. So safety first. What about boiler separation wall? is it must be done by 10-inch RCC wall or 10-inch brick wall can be provided. Well, you have to go through the code for that uh, particular information because there is no prescription here. Uh, for any component that has a explosion risk or fire risk, it has to be separated, and it has to be separated either by distance or by barrier wall. So the distance, how much it will be, or the barrier wall, what the material or thickness or it will be, has to be checked from the code, and or it might be both distance and barrier wall. So this session is about a general understanding of the occupancy and the construction classification. We are actually we are not going to the detail of materials and but the idea, I think you are clear already that there is a need for separation. So the specification will say that how much separation is needed here. Is boiler can be set on the floor above ground floor, that is first floor above for a 3-storied utility building. If boiler has a hazard of explosion, then it falls into a hazardous category. And like any other hazardous category, it needs separation. I think you better consult the code, but the general understanding of it says that any explosion hazard component must be separated by distance from the main occupancy. So these are the questions. Thank you all. Okay. Yep. Yep. Mm. From Abdul Rahim. You can rephrase. You can rephrase. Yep. Well, there are two more questions. One is about mixed occupancy, non-separated use. I think I have explained it again, but yeah, C1 and C3 same fire index. Yes, they are. Well, let me answer the question of C1 and C3 first. Well, here it is said that C1 is institution for care of children and C3 is custodial institution for incapable adults, and they are of same fire index. They are fire index 1. Yeah, but I don't understand exactly the purpose of this question, because there are other categories or subcategories in the same fire index. C1 and C3, if the question is that if they can be mixed or not, the code has different provisions in different tables and general guidelines about when we will go to the detailed descriptions of each occupancy. We'll see that there are general and specific guidelines about each of the occupancy classifications. That will determine if the if they can be mixed or not. So I think if you are asking about the whether they can be mixed or not, uh, that will need further investigation. But basically, the information we have given, there is a table that determine the separation hours between them, uh, describes if they can be uh, used together or not. Okay, there is a question. My query is why code separate A1 and A2 in BNBC? In full BNBC, there are no separate provisions for A1 and A2, I think according to the occupancy category. Okay. I think this is done in terms of encouraging a relatively higher density situation or moderate density situation in our context. They have more or less uh, all occupancies of A1, A2, A3, A4, A categories have many similarities. A1, A2 are similar, of course, but they have some differences as well. If you go through the code, you can find it. Why, since there is inability issue? Actually, I don't understand. If it is when if you are indicating about disability or something, well, there is a separate segment in part 3 which deals with differently able people. So it is there. We are just not covering it today. What steps needs to be taken when it is observed that the structure is not made with maintaining occupancy category as per BNBC? Well, it is up to the enforcing authority. They will take necessary measure. First of all, it is illegal, so they will take legal measures, of course. Is there any height limitation for construction I1A and 1B, IA and IB? Well, we'll discuss in detail in tomorrow's presentation about the height and other limitations. For high-rise construction, we have mentioned that it has to be at least 1B category construction. So 1A also is there. Both can be done. But the code in this part, at least in part 3, it doesn't specify separate height limitations. We have to investigate in part 4 if there is any bindings for that or not. Thank you.